Hey guys, we're back talking again about the Hurricane engine by Dodge. Now, I do want to address a couple of things from the last video I did about this engine. Now, the first thing is, man, there's a lot of hatred out there about this engine. People are not happy about the direction they've gone. And while I kind of understand it, I also think there's a little bit of ignorance involved. I think the smartest comment I saw in there was the guy saying, you know what, I'm going to wait and see how this shakes out before I form an opinion on it. I think that's the smart thing to do. Some of you could be right. This engine could be total pile of garbage. But on the other hand, it could actually be a really good engine too. So we need to keep both of those things in mind, be a bit more moderated in our approach. Now, I understand you guys are upset that it could potentially get rid of the Hemi engine, and that's another thing I'd like to address. Did I say it was immediately replacing the Hemi engine forever? No, I said it probably was the end of the Hemi in a few years. I said they'll probably keep the Hemi on for a little bit longer, and then it will replace it. I think it's just a fact of where things are going. I guess you guys aren't happy about that either. That's okay. I also saw in there a bunch of comments saying that I was a mouthpiece for the EV revolution. What on earth are you guys talking about? I don't care about electric cars. The internal combustion engine is the great love of my life. Why would I care less about electric vehicles? All I said was that that's the coming revolution. I don't have a part in that. That's just what it is. Anyway, just want to clarify those points. Let's get into talking a little bit more about the Hurricane engine. Now, I am a Dodge technician if you didn't already know that, so I did just recently take a class that they had for this new Hurricane engine. Got some more details on it. Now, I do have to be a little bit careful here. I have to kind of figure out what I can say and what I can't say, because obviously some information could be proprietary, that sort of thing. But most of the stuff listed in this class that I took was just general specifications, and thus I think it's stuff that I'm okay to pass on to you guys. We're going to find out soon enough. Okay, so I wrote some notes here to keep my thoughts straight. Now, first off, we're going to discuss kind of the similarities of the engine between the standard output and the high output versions. Now, that standard version, if you'll remember, makes in excess of 400 horsepower and 450 foot-pounds of torque. The high output version makes in excess of 500 horsepower and 475 foot-pounds of torque. So some pretty serious numbers out of these engines, no question. Now again, we are talking about the Hurricane engine, which is a 3-liter dual overhead cam inline 6 that is twin turbocharged. Now, common to both versions, the first thing is the engine block itself. The block is the same, but interestingly, there's a difference with the crank journals between the two. So it's kind of a misnomer to say that the block is the same, but essentially it's the same. Now, a lot of people were wondering about the size, the packaging of the engine. It is exactly 1 inch longer than the current Hemi engine is. So packaging-wise, it should fit very well inside any engine or any engine bay that already has a Hemi in it. Now, I thought this point was especially pertinent. This engine comes with a variable vane engine oil pump with a pulse width modulated solenoid. What does all that gobbledygook mean? It means that you can consistently change your oil pump pressure to whatever you want it to be. There's a wide range of what it can produce. Therefore, you can kind of put aside all this nonsense that I've done on my channel about swapping oil pumps for this, swapping oil pumps for that, and seeing what kind of pump pressure you get out of it. This is a continuously variable pump pressure. So whatever the engine demands are, that's what you can change it to be. So I think this is actually a really neat point, because future for tuners and stuff like that is they can actually adjust those pressures to whatever they need to be without doing any sort of mechanical upgrade. Now, these engines use the same 040 oil that the current 6.4 liter engines use. And they have cross-bolted main bearing caps, which is essentially the exact same thing that the Hemi has and what most every modern engine has as well. Just provides a lot more stability for the lower end. Think about it. If you have an inline 6 making 500 horsepower, you want to make sure there's a lot of stability within the crankshaft. Here's an interesting point. There is an after-run electric coolant pump for the turbos. So essentially, it's kind of like an old school turbo timer that after you turn the key off, the engine would run for a little while, allow those turbos to cool down. But in this case, the vehicle actually shuts off, and this little coolant pump runs electrically, runs coolant through the turbos to cool them down to give them a bit more longevity. Now, this next point, I know you guys are going to go absolutely crazy over this one. I cannot wait to see the comments on this one. The engine does not have a dipstick. Rather, what it has is a sensor built into the oil pan that reads the engine oil levels. So I know you guys are going to have a field day with that one. All right, one of the biggest assumptions I made in the last video was that the difference between the standard output engine and the high output was probably mostly going to be a software difference, that there probably wasn't going to be a whole lot of mechanical differences between the two. I could not have been more wrong. They are massively different. We're going to start it off here with the standard output engine. Now, they did give me a specification that it is 72 pounds lighter than a standard 5.7 engine, so definitely not an insignificant number there. Now, interestingly, the standard output version has actually quite a bit more emissions equipment on it than the high output version, which I thought was very interesting. In fact, the standard output one is equipped with an EGR cooler that is actually mounted behind the turbos, and then that exhaust gas runs through passages in the block, up through the cylinder head, and then into one of the turbochargers. Now, it also has a more complex PCV system on top of the engine as well. Now, the charge air cooler or intercooler, whatever you want to call it, is actually different between the two models as well. On the standard output, it has a much smaller charge air cooler with only a single inlet. And the standard output version also comes equipped with cast aluminum pistons. All right, let's switch over to the high output version. Now, this is 77 pounds lighter than a comparably equipped 6.4 liters, so same kind of weight savings you're going to see there. There's no EGR cooler on this one. Rather, the EGR function is controlled using the variable valve timing. Now, that charge air cooler is much larger on the high output, and it has a dual inlet. Now, the high output version also has forged aluminum pistons, larger crank bearing journals, and larger rod bearing caps. So you can see substantially beefed up bottom end. Now, it also has differently shaped combustion chambers with no EGR passages in the cylinder head. It also comes with upgraded valve springs, higher lift cams, and also has different spec turbochargers. So as you can see, I was completely wrong when I assumed that there would be very minor mechanical differences between the standard output and the high output. They are almost completely different engines. And you can see how much more beefed up the bottom end is on a high output version. So if you're at all interested in performance and it's something you want to upgrade, clearly that is the engine you want to go to. Don't waste your time with a standard output. So one of the things I love about a Hemi engine is that I can swap and interchange parts from different years and models almost at will, because the same base block, I can just attach different things to it and they'll work. That's not the case here. The standard output and the high output are different enough that I do not even think it's worth it to take a standard output and put high output parts on there. I think that's a waste of time. You'll want to start with the high output to begin with. Now, another point that I think it's important to clarify is that it seemed like a lot of people thought that I was glad that the V8 was going away and that they were replacing it with this inline six. That's not at all what I was saying. My point was that if things go the way I obviously think they are going and the V8 engine is not long for this world, then of the alternatives, I think we got the best possible option, because I was worried that we're going to end up with this really lame 4-cylinder something or other, or even worse, a really lame V6 something or other. My point was, if I get an inline 6-cylinder twin turbo out of this deal, if the V8 has to go away, that's the engine I want instead. So I was excited about that aspect, not about the fact that the V8 could be going away. There it is, guys, an update on the Hurricane engine. A little bit more information for you guys, hopefully that you haven't heard from somewhere else before. Go ahead and continue the arguments in the comments. I know you guys are upset about the V8 potentially going away at some point. As long as it inspires some sort of passion within me for that engine, I'm down with it.